In 1850, a young employee of the Louvre Museum, Auguste Mariette, was sent to Egypt in search of Coptic manuscripts, which he expected to obtain in the monasteries and antiquarian bookshops of Cairo. He was to deliver as much as possible of them to Paris. Inexperienced and unfamiliar with the country, Mariette failed, but he visited ancient sites near Cairo, such as necropolises of Memphis, quite hard to reach in his times. Guided by a group of Bedouins, he reached the famous step pyramid of Djoser, at that time the only structure that had resisted the desert, as if standing alone among the dunes of Saqqara. However, when he got there, he noticed the head of a sphinx sticking out of the sand. With the help of local workers, he unearthed not only this one, but an entire avenue of 140 sphinxes. While studying the work of the Greek geographer from the 1st century BC, Strabo, describing the Memphite necropolis firsthand, Mariette was convinced that he had discovered a processional path leading to the legendary Serapeum, an underground cemetery of sacred bulls, apices. He wasn't wrong. Months passed before Mariette found the entrance to the underground complex. He used explosives to get inside. What he saw in the underground exceeded his wildest expectations. The complex was over several hundred meters long in total, a real labyrinth. Walking through the torch-lit galleries, he noticed several dozen huge sarcophagi made of granite and diorite, in which the ancients placed mummified bulls. Some of the boxes weighed over 70 tons. However, the sarcophagi were empty. What happened to the mummies, and what exactly were these animals that were buried almost like pharaohs? Hello everyone, my name's Irena. Welcome to my channel Ancient Sites Girl. I invite you to a podcast about the history of ancient Egypt. Today I'll tell you about one of the oldest Egyptian cults that lasted continuously from early dynastic times to late antiquity. Although the worship of sacred animals was quite common in ancient Egypt, the cult of Apis was unique. It didn't concern all bulls, but only one special animal, which was, as it was believed, a reincarnation of the supreme creator god, who in its form descended to earth to live among people. Apis is a living god who, although dies many times, is always born again. The ancient cult of Apis constantly gained popularity, becoming a living, true symbol of Egypt. Apis was called Hapi or Hapi Ankh by the ancient Egyptians. We don't know for sure when the worship of a living bull began. According to the Egyptian priest and historian from the 3rd century BC, Manetho, it happened during the reign of the ruler of the 2nd dynasty, Kakao. But according to the so-called Palermo stone, a copy of the oldest king list written in the Old Kingdom, Apis was supposedly worshipped by King Den of the 1st dynasty in the 30th century BC. According to some researchers, Apis may have originally represented the god of fertility, Min, so it was only in the Old Kingdom that he was incorporated into the religion of Ptah to become his avatar, the new life of Ptah. the Almighty God who created everything and was in all things, the designer and creator of the universe, Ptah, returned to earth as his own son in the form of a bull. The living Apis bull, as the visible earthly manifestation of the supreme God, enjoyed the highest religious importance, second only to the pharaoh himself. However, he was more approachable than the pharaoh. His cult was more personal, sometimes very personal. Of course, the custom of ancient Egyptian women uncovering themselves in front of the sacred bull is widely known today. Lifting skirts and showing him reproductive organs was considered the best way to maintain or obtain fertility. It seems therefore that his original, early dynastic functions as a deity of fertility, abundancy, and reproduction became most entrenched in the consciousness of the Egyptians, and not only the ancient ones. We can find a fascinating testimony of the unique attitude towards Apis among Egyptian peasants in the mid-19th century in the notes of the discoverer of the Serapeum, Auguste Mariette. Quote, "About 15 women of various ages from neighboring villages stood around the statue of Apis. I saw one climbing on the bull's back and holding it for a few moments as if she were sitting on a horse, and then she went down to make room for the next one. All the gathered women, one by one, sat on the bull. I asked Muhammad and learned that this custom, repeated from time to time, is intended to prevent infertility." Mariette describes here a monumental statue of Apis decorating one of the chapels of the necropolis, currently on display in the Louvre. In Egyptian art, Apis was depicted as faithfully as possible, a black bull with white spots on his body, always with a solar disk between his horns, protected by a serpent, Urius. As Usir-Hapi, Osiris Apis, was depicted in funerary art as a bull with a coffin or mummy of the deceased on his back. Apis was rarely depicted as a bull's mummy and hardly ever as a man with the head of a bull. The cult of cattle has always existed in Egypt. It has remained one of the symbols of Egyptian culture and religion from the earliest Neolithic times until late antiquity. The oldest ceremonial burials of cattle, stone-covered mounds and cow remains lined with clay, date back to 5400 BC. Such necropolises were found in Nabta Playa, about 100 kilometers west of today's Abu Simbel, as well as in other ancient oases of the Western Desert. It seems that the progressive desertification of Eastern Sahara pushed the Neolithic pastoral peoples east, towards the Nile Valley. The oldest attempts of animal mummification in Egypt are the remains of cows with entrails filled with some kind of a dark organic substance from the times of the Naqada II culture, around 3500 BC. At that time, sacred cows were ceremonially buried in square-shaped tombs lined with stone slabs, and their bodies were covered with grass matting. In the prehistoric totems found in Hierakonpolis in the form of cow heads on poles or pillars, some researchers see the prototype of later dynastic Hathorian columns. The cult of the heavenly cow, the Lady of the Stars, the mother goddess in the form of a cow, is probably the oldest in the entire history of Egypt. A trace of this cult, perhaps originating from the semi-nomadic Saharan pastoralists of the Neolithic, was the cult of the goddesses Bat, Hathor, Nut, Neith, Mehet-Weret, as well as the cult of Apis himself. The famous Narmer palette, dating from around the 31st century BC, found in the prehistoric capital of Upper Egypt, Nekhem, better known as Hierakonpolis, depicts a bull charging at the walls of an enemy city. This is probably Narmer himself, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty and the unifier of Egypt in his animal form. Both the falcon and the bull represent the king. From the very beginning, the pharaoh in human form was shown with a bull's tail suspended from the back of his loincloth. We can see such a tail already on the image of the king Scorpion, on another artifact from Hierakonpolis, even older than the Narmer palette, the Scorpion mace head, from the so-called Dynasty 0, or simply Nagada III culture. The bull's tail is perhaps the oldest emblem of an Egyptian king, as Scorpion doesn't yet wear the characteristic pharaoh's beard. The bull's tail will remain an obligatory element of the ruler's image until the end of pharaonic Egypt. Bulls from the earliest times represented the strength and fertility of the ruler of Egypt. Pharaohs of all periods used epithets such as strong bull or mighty bull. In the pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts dating from 2400 to 2100 BC, written from the 5th to 8th dynasties, the ruler is titled as a bull over 100 times. In the oldest version of the book from the Pyramid of Unis, we read, Unis has come against you. It is Unis, wild bull of the savannah, a big-faced bull who comes from Heliopolis. Unis has come against you, wild bull of the savannah. The spells in the pyramid texts are generally believed to have their origins in early dynastic times or perhaps deep prehistory, which would explain the reference to grassy plains. Early dynastic apices, as well as those from the Old Kingdom, most likely took part in processions through the fields around Memphis, as a symbol of fertility and fruitful land. He was also present during royal public ceremonies, such as the coronation and the Sed festival, which celebrated the continuation of the pharaoh's rule and the regeneration of his vitality. From the time of Djoser, the ceremony took place in the Heb-Sed courtyard in his tomb complex at Saqqara, in the shadow of the oldest in Egypt, the famous Step Pyramid. However, Apis wasn't the only living bull which the Egyptians worshipped. Men were called Mnevis by the Greeks, was the Heliopolitan equivalent of the Memphite Apis. As we know, these two religious centers have always competed with each other, and although Heliopolis with its solar cult dominated Egyptian religion already in the Old Kingdom, Mnevis never replaced the more popular Apis, even when the priests of the sun god proclaimed him the father of the sacred bull of Memphis. Mnevis was also the physical manifestation of the supreme creator god, his Ba, who, as we know in Heliopolis, was amun-ra. Mnevis also served as an oracle. The dead bulls were embalmed and buried in the Heliopolitan necropolis, although according to some researchers, they were buried together with Apices in Saqqara. The mothers of Memphis were supposed to embody the cow goddess Hesat, and his concubines were always 2 cows kept in the sanctuary. They represented the divine Hathor and Usaset, the female counterpart of Atum. The bull worshipped by the priests of the sun, unlike Apis, was always completely black. Its strongly solar connotations protected his cult from the persecution of the times of Akhenaten, who even ordered the construction of a necropolis of these sacred bulls in his capital, Akhetaten, in today's Amun-ra. The cult of Memphis lasted as long as that of Apis. This is how Strabo describes Heliopolis. There too is Heliopolis, situated upon a large mound. It contains a temple of the sun and the ox Memphis, which is kept in a sanctuary, and is regarded by the inhabitants as a god, as Apis is regarded by the people of Memphis. A much younger cult of the sacred bull was established only in the times of the last native dynasty of Egypt, the 30th dynasty, the 4th century BC. The Bukis bull, worshipped in Hermontis, near Thebes, was the embodiment of the local god of war, Montu. He couldn't be confused with Apis or Memphis because he was entirely white with a black face. His cult survived until the 4th century AD. According to Strabo, there were even more local cults of sacred bulls in Roman Egypt. In his geography, he writes, "The Memphite worship Venus, and a sacred cow is kept there, as Apis is maintained at Memphis and Memphis at Heliopolis. These animals are regarded as gods, but there are other places, and these are numerous, both in the delta and beyond it, in which a bull or a cow is maintained, which are not regarded as gods, but only as sacred." Unlike most sacred animals worshipped in Egyptian temples, only one bull in all of Egypt could be worshipped as Apis. This particular manifestation of Ptah had to possess very specific physical characteristics so that the priests recognized him as an incarnation of the great creator god. These features were noted by the famous father of history, Herodotus, from the 5th century BC. This Apis or Epaphus is a calf born of a cow that can never conceive again. By what the Egyptians say, the cow is made pregnant by a light from heaven, and thereafter gives birth to Apis. The marks of this calf called Apis are these. He is black and has on his forehead a 3-cornered white spot, and the likeness of an eagle on his back. The hairs of the tail are double, and there is a knot under the tongue. As we've just heard, Apis, or Epaphus as the Greeks called him, was said to have been conceived by light from heaven, most likely a bolt of lightning. The knot under the bull's tongue was supposed to resemble a scarab. The description of the sacred bull is also found in Strabo's text describing the city of Memphis. It contains temples, among which is that of Apis, who is the same as Osiris. Here the ox Apis is kept in a sort of sanctuary, and is held, as I have said, to be a god. The forehead and some other small parts of its body are white, the other parts are black. By these marks, the fitness of the successor is always determined, when the animal to which they pay these honors dies. In front of the sanctuary is a court, in which there is another sanctuary for the dam of Apis. Interestingly, according to Strabo, the mother of Apis had a part of the sanctuary for herself. The divine calf could have been born anywhere in Egypt, so finding him wasn't easy. After a detailed examination, one of the calves was chosen by theologians as the reincarnation of the great god. The new Apis was fed with milk by his mother for 4 months. The oldest account describing the search for a new Apis was found in the Serapeum on a stele from the reign of King Pami, a ruler from the 22nd dynasty of Libyan origins, who ruled from Bubastis in the Nile Delta in the 8th century BC. One searched for His Excellence everywhere in Lower Egypt. It took 3 months until he was found in Hutshedabad, while one had been wandering through the lagoons of the delta and every jazeera of Lower Egypt. He was introduced to Hutkaptah in presence of his father Ptah south of his wall, through the high priest of Ptah, Sem priest in the temple of Ptah, the great chief of the Meshwesh Pedis. Meshwesh is a Libyan tribe that massively populated the delta at that time. The 22nd and 23rd dynasties of the Third Intermediate Period, which ruled northern Egypt, probably originated from it. It was very important not to separate the calf from its mother. They were both initially placed in a special sanctuary in Nilopolis, where they stayed for 40 days. Then, on the night of the full moon, the divine bull was transported down the Nile to Memphis, to the temple of Ptah. The place of installation of the living Apis, also called the Place of Apis, was a complex of buildings located in the southwestern part of the precinct of Ptah. It included the stall, the pavilion of appearances, and the place of embalmment, where only the Apis bulls were mummified. Unfortunately, there's almost no trace of the Place of Apis, just like the entire great sanctuary of Ptah. The bull was being lovingly cared for in its new home. He was massaged and perfumed, fed the best food, slept on luxurious bedding, and from time to time cows were brought to him, so he had his own harem. Interestingly, other bulls were sacrificed to him, and they too had to meet specific criteria. Herodotus writes, "Bulls are considered the property of Apis, and therefore tested in the following way. A priest appointed for the purpose examines the animal, and if he finds even a single black hair upon him, pronounces him unclean. He goes over him with the greatest care, first making him stand up, then lie on his back, after which he pulls out his tongue to see that, 2. It is clean according to the recognized marks. He also inspects the tail to make sure the hair on it grows properly. Then, if the animal passes all these tests successfully, the priest marks him by twisting around his horns a band of papyrus, which he seals with wax and stamps with his signet ring. The bull is finally taken away, and the penalty is death for anybody who sacrifices an animal which hasn't been marked in this manner." The 1st century AD Greek historian Plutarch adds, "The Egyptians only sacrifice red-colored bulls, and a single black or white hair in the animal's head disqualifies it for sacrifice. They sacrifice creatures wherein the souls of the wicked have been confined, and through this view arouse the custom of cursing the animal to be sacrificed, and cutting off its bead and throwing it into the Nile. No bullock is sacrificed which has not on it the seal of the priests who were called sealers. The impression from this seal represents a man upon his knees, with his hands tied behind him and a sword pointed at his throat. Also, Plutarch writes about a special well intended for Apis. They give the Apis bull his water from a well specially set apart for the purpose, and they prevent him altogether from drinking of the Nile. Not indeed that they regard the river as impure and polluted because of the crocodiles which are in it, as some pretend, for there is nothing which the Egyptians hold in greater veneration than the Nile, but because its waters are observed to be particularly nourishing and fattening, and they strive to prevent fatness in Apis as well as in themselves, for they are anxious about their bodies, that they should sit as light and easy about their souls as possible, and that their mortal part shouldn't oppress and weigh down the divine and immortal. Even after the enthronement, it was possible for the faithful to see the sacred bull. Apis often stayed in the open court of Ptah's sanctuary in his temenos, which was in practice his pasture. However, only the most distinguished guests of Ptah's priests could admire him up close. Some ancient texts mention a window of appearance in which he appeared from time to time to the common people. The most famous ancient text describing the enthronement of Apis is the work of Herodotus regarding the military campaigns of the Persian king of the Achaemenid Empire, the son of the famous Cyrus the Great, Cambyses II, who entered Memphis in 525 BC, which initiated the Persian rule over Egypt, called the First Egyptian Satrapy, or the 27th dynasty. Cambyses' campaign in the south of Egypt, however, resulted in great losses, and the attempt to conquer Nubia, Herodotus calls it Ethiopia, ended in failure. The decimated Persian army returned to Memphis, which seemed to be joyfully celebrating the recent defeat of its occupier. Herodotus writes, "After Cambyses came to Memphis, there appeared in Egypt that Apis whom the Greeks called Epaphus, at which revelation straightway the Egyptians donned their fairest garments and kept high festival. Seeing the Egyptians so doing, Cambyses was fully persuaded that these signs of joy were for his misfortunes, and summoned the rulers of Memphis. When they came before him, he asked them why the Egyptians acted so at the moment of his coming, with so many of his army lost, though they had done nothing like it when he was before at Memphis. The rulers told him that a god who had been wont to reveal himself at long intervals of time had now appeared to them, and that all Egypt rejoiced and made holiday whenever he so appeared. At this Cambyses said that they lied, and he punished them with death for their lie." Unconvinced, Cambyses ordered Apis to be brought to him. Herodotus continues, "When the priests led Apis in, Cambyses, for he was well nigh mad, drew his dagger and made to stab the calf in the belly, but smote the thigh. Then laughing he said to the priests, 'Wretched wight, are these your gods, creatures of flesh and blood, that can feel weapons of iron? That is a god worthy of the Egyptians. But for you, you shall suffer for making me your laughing stock.' So saying, he bade those whose business it was to scourge the priests well, and to kill any other Egyptian whom they found holiday making. So the Egyptian festival ended, and the priests were punished, and Apis lay in the temple and died of the blow on the thigh. When he was dead of the wound, the priests buried him without Cambyses' knowledge." This shameful act, according to Herodotus, was intended to take revenge on the Persian king, who after 2 years learned about the attempted palace coup in Persia when he was stationed with his army in Syria. His courtier, Magus, named Smerdis, was to usurp the throne. Herodotus writes, "Having wept and grieved by all his misfortune, he sprang upon his horse with intent to march at once to Susa against the Magus. As he sprang upon his horse, the cap fell off the sheath of his sword, and the naked blade pierced his thigh, wounding him in the same place where he had once wounded the Egyptian god Apis." According to Herodotus, soon the king dies childless as a result of a self-inflicted wound. However, the story about the Persian king killing the sacred bull seems to be a work of fiction. Artifacts concerning the deaths of subsequent Apises have been found, dating back to the 18th dynasty. The burial stelae from the Serapeum at Saqqara, dating to the late period, are particularly complete and allow for a precise chronology of events. We know that one Apis died during the reign of Cambyses II, approximately soon after the Persian conquest of Egypt. However, it wasn't a newly enthroned calf as Herodotus described, but an old, 19-year-old animal. Moreover, the stele donated to the dead bull by Cambyses shows the Persian king in a traditional Egyptian pharaoh's garment, kneeling before Apis. The stele also informs that the ruler would provide a proper burial and an impressive sarcophagus for the bull. In a word, the ruler presents himself as a zealous worshipper of Apis. Another Apis, who took the place of the old bull who died during the reign of Cambyses, lived peacefully for several years and died in the 4th year of the reign of Darius the Great, 517 BC. So he too can't be the bull from the Herodotus account. So where does the black legend of Cambyses repeated by Herodotus come from? There's circumstantial evidence that points to the reluctance towards the king, including a papyrus preserved to this day, describing his economic reforms, which reduced the income of Egyptian temples, probably also in Memphis. The new king simply stopped subsidizing some of the temples. Although Herodotus was to travel to Persian Egypt and other parts of the empire, he didn't shy away from anti-Persian propaganda. The title Herald of Ptah expresses the bull's role as an intermediary between the supreme god of Memphis and humanity, and also suggests the specific function of this physical manifestation of the god. Hundreds of believers watched Apis from a distance as he walked around the open spaces of his palace, asking him questions and observing his reactions. There have always been many Memphites there. They were passionate about his life. They were afraid and worried when the bull was sick, and they were happy when he regained health and full strength. Of course, divinations for distinguished guests of the oracle who could have direct contact with Apis were of particular importance. A writer from the 4th century AD, Diogenes Laertius, in his work entitled Lives of Eminent Philosophers, wrote about the famous Greek astronomer. Quote, Eudoxus of Cnidos flourished about the 103rd Olympiad, and that he discovered the properties of curse. He died in his 53rd year. When he was in Egypt with Chonupis of Heliopolis, the sacred bull Apis licked his cloak. From this, the priests foretold that he would be famous, but short-lived, so we are informed by Favorinus in his Memorabilia. There is a poem of our own upon him, which runs thus. It is said that at Memphis, Eudoxus learned his coming fate from the bull with beautiful horns. No words did it utter, for whence comes speech to a bull? Nature did not provide the young bull Apis with a chattering tongue, but standing sideways by him, it licked his robe, by which it plainly prophesied, "You shall soon die." Whereupon soon after this fate overtook him, when he had seen 53 risings of the Pleiades. Therefore, licking a pilgrim's robes predicted a good but short life, at least according to the Memphite priests. The oracle of Apis issued prophecies not only based on the behavior of the bull himself, but also on the behavior of children playing around its sanctuary or participating in his processions. The divine Apis couldn't live longer than 25 years from the date of enthronement. If he had lived to that age, he would have been killed by the priests. They threw him into the well, the location of which was a closely guarded secret of the sanctuary, where the bull drowned. Then the priests publicly announced that old Apis had suffered an accident and his body had been lost. However, if the bull died before 25 years, he received a splendid burial in Saqqara in the Serapeum, because it became Osir-Hapi, Osiris Apis. Mourning after the death of Apis was national, all Egyptian, and lasted 70 days. During this time, the priests had to find his successor. Thanks to incomplete but numerous ancient written testimonies, we can quite accurately reconstruct the course of events related to the death and burial of Apis. The news about the death of the sacred bull was conveyed to other priests of Ptah's sanctuary by the so-called Wab priest. The Wab priests, which means pure ones, served as clerical doctors of people but also of animals. The person whose function was called the Hour Watcher shouted, "Horus yesterday, Osiris today," which referred to a new aspect of the divine Apis. The priest then informed the royal palace. If the pharaoh couldn't come to Ptah's temple in person, members of the royal family, accompanied by high officials, went there in his place. The Serapeum stelaes inform us that after cleansing the body in the traditional temporary purification tent, the Ibu, the deceased Apis remained in the Wabat, pure place, a special stone building that served as a mortuary and embalming house. The carrying of the body to Wabat, the place of embalming, was accompanied by the loud lamentation of the gathered priests, and funeral ceremonies were performed in the temple. The priests present at the dead Apis were obliged to fast. For the first 4 days, they had to eat bread and drink water. They were also required to take a ritual bath, after which they shaved their entire bodies thoroughly. The 70-day funeral ceremony involves carefully planned successive rituals. The embalming of the dead bull took 68 days and was extremely careful. A group of priests, mummifiers in the late and Ptolemaic periods, followed a special manual and instruction written during the Said times, that's during the reign of the 26th dynasty, the 7th and the 6th centuries BC. The last 2 days of the ceremony included 3 funeral processions, from the temple of Ptah to the shores of the Holy Lake southwest of Memphis, then back to the sanctuary where the precinct of Apis was located, and finally from there to the Serapeum at Saqqara. The removed bull's entrails were taken from the clean place outside, where there was a special tent housing vessels for all embalming waste. After 2 months, on the finished mummy decorated with a death mask, a ceremony of the opening of the mouth was performed. On the 69th day, the mummy was placed in the sacred bark. The king and the crowd of gathered believers were waiting in the outer courtyard of the temple. When the bark carried by the priests left the temple, the solemn procession, amid laments and screams, set off towards the Lake of the Kings, one of several lakes on the outskirts of Memphis which no longer exist. After returning to the temple of Ptah on the last day of the funeral ceremonies, the procession with the mummified Apis Osiris set off west to Saqqara, the kingdom of Sokar, the god of the Memphite necropolis. The burial of ancient Egyptians in the vicinity of the Serapeum was the highest honor. The multitude of tombs and visible votive chapels from different periods located along the processional avenue to the Serapeum led Mariette to its discovery. As we know, in the mid-19th century, the procession path to the Serapeum was decorated with approximately 140 sphinxes erected during the 30th dynasty, 4th century BC. Today we can admire most of them in Paris, while the rest went to Cairo, Berlin and Vienna. We can only imagine what an impression the Serapeum made on the mourners, which still in Roman times covered an area of 300 square meters, fenced with a wall, with a monumental gate pylon located on the northeastern side of the sanctuary. All above-ground objects of the Serapeum were disassembled to the ground level, but in ancient times, although it was a cemetery, it was teeming with life, with its settlements, houses of priests, embalmers, workshops and shrines, and even small temples around its walls. A loud crowd of worshippers accompanied Apis to the entrance to the underground. Before the mummy was brought inside, a group of dwarves or foreign pygmies performed mysterious rituals. Their acrobatic dances were probably related to the cult of the god Bes, who effectively drove away demons. It's his image that Mariette came across when he discovered the entrance to the underground tomb galleries. Inside, the bull was placed in a huge sarcophagus weighing several dozen tons. Once the lid closed, the funeral came to an end. The famous huge stone sarcophagi for the burial of Apises were introduced only in Said times, 26th dynasty. Earlier, sacred bulls were placed in wooden coffins. The final arrangement of underground galleries that we can admire today was created in Persian and Ptolemaic times. Only one of the burials has survived intact to this day. Gold jewelry with the name of Ramesses the Great was found there. Interestingly, in the nearby catacombs in Iseum, mummies of Apis's mothers have been found. The cemetery of the oldest Apises from the Old and Middle Kingdom, mentioned in ancient sources, is still waiting to be discovered, just like, according to archaeologists' estimates, as many as 70% of the tombs of Saqqara, which is huge, the largest in Egypt. We are not sure if it was the pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Amenhotep III, who initiated the tradition of ceremonial Apis burials in the Serapeum, but the oldest accounts we've got come from his times. Originally, each bull had its own separate tomb. The change occurs in the 19th dynasty, when Ramesses the Great builds an underground Serapeum complex intended for multiple burials. The funeral of Apis was an event of great importance on a nationwide scale. Participating in a funeral may have been the most important religious honor for the Egyptians. Pilgrims and mourners wanted to commemorate this event with a commemorative inscriptions, that is, various types of steles. Over 7,000 of them were discovered, including expensive ones, often measuring a meter high, richly decorated with texts and images of Apis. Such official epitaphs were placed at the entrance to the underground. Several times I had the opportunity to see in person the countless niches in the Serapeum, but unfortunately they were empty. Most of the steles are today in the Louvre in Paris. They were sponsored by people who personally participated in the funeral, often as priests or generous benefactors. Most of the steles, however, are small and modest. On them we find the names of the mourners, testimonies of their faith, and a description of the fast accompanying mourning. Interestingly, all the inhabitants of Memphis abstained from eating and drinking during the funeral. They were equal in their grief, regardless of social status. On one of the steles sponsored by a noble, we read, "While I was before Apis, lamenting together with the poor, there was no elevating of my position above them." Modesty, humility, and solemnity accompanied the last journey of Apis, who at the moment of death became Osiris. Apis Osiris. According to the Egyptian tradition prevailing since the Middle Kingdom, when not only the deceased king but every justified deceased became Osiris, the Apis bull too became one with the god of the dead. Over time, however, Apis becomes a unique Memphite form of Osiris himself while still alive. In the late period, the cult of Ptah wanes beyond Memphis, while the popular national cult of Osiris reaches its climax. The transformation of Apis thus makes it possible to maintain his prominence throughout Egypt and even increases his popularity. In the funerary iconography of the late period and Ptolemaic times, representations of Apis Osiris in the form of a bull carrying the mummy of the deceased on its back become extremely popular. This motif was used to decorate coffins, mummy cartonages, and coins, even in Roman times. The popularity of Osiris Apis leads Ptolemies to introduce and promote him as the highest state deity, the Hellenized syncretic god, Serapis, who combines the features of many deities, both Egyptian and Greek. The incredibly popular cult of Apis in Ptolemaic Egypt declined significantly under Roman rule. After the deaths of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony in 30 BC, the victorious Octavian was invited to visit the sacred bull in the sanctuary of Ptah in Memphis. However, he refused the priests, saying, "I am used to respecting gods, not cattle." The new Roman administration also refused to cooperate with the previously powerful priests of Ptah, whose dynasty was very closely connected with the Ptolemies. Relations with the clergy warmed up after a few years when the divine Augustus was officially included into the cult of Ptah. The first years of Roman rule were, however, a crisis of the cult of Apis and his sanctuary. Strabo, present in Memphis probably in 26 BC, described a neglected sanctuary. There is also Serapeum, in a very sandy place, so that the wind piles up heaps of sand. Some sphinxes were buried under them up to the head, which I saw, while others were half visible. Augustus probably wanted to weaken the influence of the Ptah priests for political reasons, as he generously supported the less popular cult of the sacred bull Bukis in Hermonthis. We know for sure about 5 enthronements of sacred bulls during the times of Tiberius, Vespasian, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Vespasian's son and future emperor Titus even took part in the official enthronement celebrations in Memphis. Roman emperors eagerly referred to this national symbol of the Egyptians, minting their bronze coins in the Alexandrian mint and placing apis on them until the times of Septimius Severus, the 3rd century AD. The presence of apis in the Memphite sanctuary was no longer apparent to the Egyptians. The bull was probably gone already during the reign of Domitian in Rome, 81 to 96 AD. Only from the times of Hadrian comes information about the discovery of a new apis after many years, as Roman sources say. This caused unrest in Alexandria, where they wanted to have their beloved god at home, not in Memphis. The last mention in Roman sources regarding a living apis comes from the visit of Emperor Septimius Severus to Egypt in 200. The 4th century saw the progressive Christianization of Egypt. At the end of 356, Emperor Constantius II ordered the closure of pagan sanctuaries throughout the empire. It would seem that the cult of Apis is a thing of the past, but in 361, after the death of Constantius II, Julian, called the Apostate, the penultimate ruler of the Christian Constantine dynasty, became emperor. He unexpectedly rejected Christianity to support previously persecuted pagan cults throughout the empire. It is during these times that the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus records the last known sacred bull Apis in Egypt, exactly during the winter between 362 and 363. Vigorous reforms in the empire under Julian led to social unrest, food shortages, and rising prices. The emperor also struggled with drought and earthquakes, as well as with the pressure of the Persians of the Sasanian Empire on the eastern border. He definitely needed some kind of miracle. While in Antioch in 362, where he was preparing for his great campaign against the Persians, he received a letter from the governor of Egypt about the persistent and strenuous search for the bull of Apis, which ended in success. The governor confirmed his finding and reported to the emperor. Finding him is, according to the inhabitants of these areas, a reason to celebrate and a prophecy of an abundance of crops and various goods. The discovery of the sacred bull was a good omen for Julian for the war with Persia. We don't know whether the found calf met all the requirements of the Memphite priests, but for the 4th century Egyptians, it must have had a really special meaning. The birth of this bull marked the appearance of a deity on earth, absent for 150 years. The last Apis, however, didn't save Julian, who died in Mesopotamia during his campaign against the Sasanian Empire later that year. By this time, the Memphite sanctuary was already in ruins, and the bull was probably kept in Alexandria. He certainly didn't live long enough to become one of the victims of the Christian destruction of the Serapeum of Alexandria in 391. Perhaps right after Julian's death, the bull was returned to its owner. We will most likely never know. In Christian Egypt, Apis fell into oblivion, his sanctuary and necropolis in ruins. The Apis mummies from the Serapeum became victims of tomb robbers and were eventually thrown away and destroyed by the Coptic hermit monks living in Saqqara. However, as we know from Mariette's account, this incredibly popular cult somehow survived in its rudimentary form in the consciousness of the Egyptians, as folk superstitions and strange practices. The discovery of Apis' mysterious catacombs in the mid-19th century stimulated the imagination of millions, and to this day, Apis remains one of the most recognizable and colorful symbols of pharaonic Egypt, which he in fact was. I hope you learned something new about the beliefs of ancient Egyptians. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to all supporters of my channel, both patrons and those sending super thanks. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to hear about next time. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye and see you on the next one.